this is from our friend Adam. He writes this email. He says, my question is the tithe still relevant today? My wife and I currently give monthly to an organization that blesses Israel. We have always tithed somehow and have been told, even in Messianic congregations, that the tithe should go to the local body. We can't really find where that switch is made in the word, but I've always felt the need to give it. What do y'all think? Well, the reason that I would say that the reason that you haven't found that switch in the Bible is because it's not there. Let's first talk about what the tithe is. The tithe is, and this is one thing that I love about the inconsistency of the Christian church. Now, I consider myself a Christian, so please don't turn your radio off quite yet. I consider myself a Christian, but I find a lot of ironic things within the church. This is one of them. The church continues to say, "Oh, the law's been done away with. You don't need to do the law anymore. Get rid of the law." But then they say, "We want to make sure you're giving 10% to the church." Well, the tithe is in the Torah. It is not in the apostolic scriptures. And the places, well, I shouldn't say that. The places where it is in the apostolic scriptures is talking about the actual tithe. Remember that when the apostolic scriptures or the New Testament, as some of our listeners might know it as, during that time period, the temple was still standing for the most part. I think Hebrews was written after the destruction of the temple, or maybe while it was being destroyed, something like that. Anyway, the point is that the apostolic scriptures as a whole, for the most part, were written while the temple was standing. So you still had the tithe. What is the tithe? Is the tithe 10% of everything that you own? No, it's not. The tithe has to do with land, and has to do with the fact that the land of Israel, not the U.S., as Khan would like to have us believe, but the land of Israel is God's land. It belongs to God. It does not belong to us. It belongs to him. And so the tithe is the 10% of the harvest from the land. It has nothing to do with money. You could not bring money as the tithe. Jump in here anytime, Rob.
No, you're doing great, man.
So the tithe is not, you can't bring money as the tithe.
And the tithe supports the Levites.
Yes, that's
priesthood.
Right. That's exactly right.
It's who have no inheritance in the land.
So the Levites didn't get a piece of land. All the other tribes got a piece of land.
They were given 48 cities and pasture land surrounding the cities, 6 of which were cities of refuge. But yeah, they weren't invested in the agricultural project.
Yeah, exactly. So to be able to feed the Levites and their families, keep them employed, basically, we had to bring different things. Now, there was monetary value. Once a year, the half shekel had to be brought. And of course, during the Second Temple period especially, this was all very corrupt. So the priesthood was very corrupt. They were scamming people out of money. And Yeshua goes into the temple complex and he turns over all this stuff. Why does he do that? Well, because the priests were basically saying, you can't bring your own animal to sacrifice. Yeah, it has to be one of ours. That way we can make sure that it's unblemished. And then what would they do? They would hike the price way up. So if you wanted to come and buy a perfect animal, it was inflated astronomically, So anyway, all these things went into effect. Let's listen to some. Let's see here. K. Schneider. I don't want K. Schneider. Well, and this is even from Messianics. I wonder if okay, so let's listen to what Christians say. First, here is a sound clip from, and once again, this is all in your show notes. This is actually quite a long one. I just pulled the entire video. This is a video that was made by a Baptist church, okay? Let's listen to it.
Meet Bob. Bob's been coming to church for a while now. Amidst the busyness of work and life, he wants to grow closer to the Lord, but he feels like something's missing. He reads his Bible, well, sometimes. He's attending a home group and even listening to podcasts of old sermons. But try as he might, he just feels like something's missing.
What's missing?
Then Bob heard a teaching on giving financially.
Oh.
He felt a little convicted, knowing that he and his family were not regularly tithing 10%. But he wondered, does God really command me to give the first 10% to the church? Does
No.
the church really even need the money? What's in it for me? Why should I give? Bob decided to dig a little deeper and look into it for himself. So he opened his Bible
Good job, Bob.
and really didn't know where to look. So he Googled Bible passages about money. He was very surprised to find a large number of verses about tithing,
Oh.
and not just in the Old Testament. Jesus himself taught about tithing to the local church. Now Bob was really feeling
Wait, hang on just a sec.
He was beginning to see why the tithe was so important. It wasn't
I got to stop right there. Where does Yeshua? Okay.
Yeah, don't do that. Yeshua taught about. Find that little segment.
Let's go again.
about tithing, and not just in the Old Testament. Jesus himself taught about tithing to the local church. Now Bob was really feeling convicted. He was beginning to see why the tithe was so important. It wasn't about the church needing money or trying to scam him in some way. It was a question of the heart. Bob repented of his disobedience.
Oh, he
and started
repented!
to return the first 10% of his income to God. He was pleasantly surprised to see.
Okay, so I think you get the idea. We don't need to play the whole clip.
I like the line. Jesus taught about tithing to the local church,
Bob repented.
and Bob repented.
So
I'm glad Bob. I'm glad Bob opened his Bible.
okay, I want to quickly say this. Look, the fact of the matter is that our congregations, look, and you know, I go to a congregation where we have a building that we rent. I know that there are other people, even people in the forum right now. Rob himself, of course, and then we have Andrews in there. His congregation meets at a beautiful place, and so I mean, these things cost money. You can't just say, "Oh, we're going to have a group," and once it gets big enough that it can't stay in a home anymore, that's it. If you want to keep going with fellowship and whatnot, and you want things, not long ago at our congregation, we said, "Oh, we need money." We brought it to the congregation. We need money to help fix the copier. And somebody said, "Well, why would we need a copier?" People don't put two and two together. That every handout that we give out on Shabbat, every kid's lesson with the coloring pages and all that, those are all copied. So it costs money to keep these things going. And if you like that kind of stuff, okay, then it costs money. And you're going to have to give some money to the congregation if you want to benefit from those things. There's no doubt about that. But that's not a tithe. You're not required to give anything.
Have you ever heard people say, like, yeah, I tithe like 8%? Or like they tithe. In other words, they don't realize. I've talked to a number of people throughout the years where tithe, and then they have to clarify that it's not 10%. They don't understand that tithe is a word based on, it means 10%. You can't tithe something.
You can't tithe something that's
not 10%, in other words. But also the point is, the tithe defined by the Torah is for produce produced in the land of Israel.
That's right. So
it goes to the priests and the Levites according to, there's different years for different things. But the point is, that's what it is. You can't tithe. You wouldn't tithe. You couldn't bring. In other words, let's say we're back in the temple period, and some Jewish person had land in Rome. Well, they wouldn't take a tenth of their produce and take
bring
it to Israel as if that was
the tithe.
A tithe. The Levites would be going, "What are you doing?" That's great. Sure, yeah, we use some good grain here, but that's not a tithe. It's not from the land.